Jesus did all sorts of miracles. Like the one this morning's reading was telling us about, on how Jesus was able to take 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people. Do you ever find yourself wondering, I wonder why God doesn't do any miracles anymore? You ever find yourself wondering that? Even in the Hebrew Scriptures, we would see where God was very active within the world through the burning bush and Moses, or dividing the Red Sea to allow the crossing of the Israelites, or Jacob wrestling with the angel, or how the walls were brought down in Jericho. But that was then, and this is now, and now we don't seem to see God doing these extravagant things. And I think it's legitimate to ask that question, why not? I suppose if we're going to ask that kind of a question, we need to qualify what makes a miracle. If we look at all these things that Jesus was doing as a way of defining types of miracles, we would see Jesus as a healer. That was a huge part of his ministry. Healing people who had physical issues such as withered limbs and blindness and leprosy, people who had continual bleeding, who couldn't hear. Then Jesus would also cast out evil spirits. He walked on the water. He made wine out of water. He helped fishermen catch netfuls of fish. Jesus brought back people from the dead and even remained among his own friends for 40 days after his own death. Jesus also told his disciples that they would do even greater things than what he himself had been doing. So why don't we see these things today? Take this morning's text as an example of a miracle. Can you imagine having a weenie roast out here using the fire pit? We planned for about 40 people, but because of all the fun stuff that's being provided, like a bouncy house for the kids or a cornhole for the adults to play, the smell of all the good food, and that the people in the neighborhood start kind of coming around, and they stop by and they join us, and let's say maybe 200 of them. One of the big questions would be asked, oh my gosh, how are 60 hot dogs going to feed 200 people? Because all we have is a little bit of extra potato salad. It's not going to do a lot of good. This is exactly what the disciples were thinking when Jesus asked Philip, where will you buy enough food to feed all these people? Philip says, even spending all of their treasury, there still would not be enough money to buy even a small snack for everyone. Then comes the zinger. Jesus always has a zinger. He asks them, what do you have? What do you have? Jesus is giving the disciples the opportunity to feed the crowd. In the eyes of the disciples, they did not have a clue on how to handle such a huge, hungry group of people. They were overwhelmed by that situation. You know, it's easy to become distracted with unanswerable questions when we start to wonder how Jesus fed these people with just those few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. When we spend our time on trying to figure out the how of this story, we are missing the intent of John in telling us about it. Today's lesson isn't about how much bread and fish were able to be multiplied to feed this enormous group of people, but rather it is a story dealing with perception of resources. The first church that I served was in a small village in Washington State. With the help of a rather generous legacy, this church was able to hire their first full-time ministry for from many years of just having part-time ministers. But even with that legacy, there was still a need to do fundraising to help supplement the budget. At that time, the state of Washington had started an experiment of inviting nonprofit organizations of setting up free coffee stands, coffee and cookies at a rest area. And in turn, that hosting organization could put out a donation can and pamphlets about the organization. You weren't able to do any preaching. You just had a pamphlet that you were able to just have available should someone want one. Well, this was a huge undertaking for our church of 40 people, most of over the age of 70. To man such to man both sides of this interstate rest area, starting at 6 o'clock Friday evening until 6 o'clock Sunday evening. 24/7. Well, 24 hours during that weekend. Now, even though it was a fundraiser, I kept presenting this as a missional outreach for the church. Okay, not everybody always hears what the pastor has to say. You believe that? And one of the patriarchs of the church, who was a big supporter of what we were trying to do, because he realized we needed the fundraiser, came to me after his first shift, and he was so distraught. He says, Pastor, he says, I cannot believe it. You will not believe how many people come up and they take that coffee and they take those cookies and they don't give anything. I said, do you remember the sign that says free? I said, if you look at this as solely a fundraiser, you are going to be disappointed. I said, but if you think about what we're doing as a way of helping weary travelers take some time off the road, which ultimately the hope is it will save lives by giving them some free refreshment. Don't you think that's a marvelous ministry? Well, on his next shift, actually he did 2 or 3 and volunteered for an extra 1 or 2, I think. He came back to me and he was absolutely amazed because his mindset had shifted. And he came back and he says, do you know how many people we have been able to help today? The fundraising aspect, it paid off handsomely. I mean, we made about $4,000 during that time frame. But it was through this outreach that we as a church started to understand a broader understanding of what ministry was about. It was no longer just being here, having our doors open on Sunday morning, available for people to come in. We were actually stepping outside of ourselves and providing something for everybody with no expectation of return. When a congregation only focuses on its survival and its outreach, then with that attitude and its need to grow a church in order to pay its bills, then its missional outreach has lost its prophetic edge, its real meaning for existence. Ministry should leave people explaining that God is still speaking and working in the world, bringing hope to souls weary of oppressive social systems and values. In the bulletin insert that you had a couple of weeks ago, it highlighted the story of Peace United Church of Christ in Greensboro, North Carolina, as they were in the process of building their first tiny house that would provide shelter for one of the 53 homeless veterans in their community. This congregation had partnered up with Tiny Houses Greensboro. It was a local nonprofit building a safe, affordable, permanent housing for those who were in need. But what impressed me most about the mission outreach is the idea that as a faith community, they were not providing a handout, but rather they were providing a hand up to those who needed a chance to pull their lives back together. Peace Church is building this house on the parking lot where everybody can see it. And in the process, they have attracted a lot of non-church people in their surrounding community asking how they can also come in and help in providing that house to be built. This is a modern day example of feeding the 5,000. This is a church providing a mission with a prophetic edge, a mission that is transforming lives in the name of God's love for all people. It is a miracle in motion. In the Gospel of John, we are presented with the challenges that come with an overwhelming need. A hungry crowd of 5,000 people. We know our resources cannot begin to feed them all. But as we take what we have and do it as a way of thanking God for the gifts that we have received, God has a way of multiplying those gifts to where lives are changed for the better. Would you like to know what the reason is for a church to exist? Why it is supposed to exist? It is to help people find their full potential. The church is called to reach out not to just those who are in the mainstream of life, but to those who are disenfranchised, providing opportunity for all who live in that community, where everyone is welcome, not just some, but all. The church is called to reach out in love, not to perpetuate itself, but to build a community that continues to reach out to people who are in need, who are hurting, who need to find themselves. In the UCC, we speak of God's economy in words of abundance and extravagant hospitality. Yet too often we operate on the mindset of scarcity. How guilty are we in saying we don't have enough food for them? How often do we act like the disciples, saying, we need more money to do a program. We need more members to survive. We need more, Lord. We need more. We don't have enough. It's up to you, God, to do something about it. While we're standing there kind of just wringing our hands over the whole situation, worrying and doing little. When the disciples asked Jesus to act, he says, what do you have? What do you have? The late President John F. Kennedy said it this way: ask not what your country can do for you, but rather ask what you can do for your country. The church needs to ask less about how God is going to help us and start asking more of God, what do you want us to do? Do you get it? We don't need to be asking for help. We need to be asking for guidance. What does God have us to do? At the beginning of this story, the disciples perceived that their reality was not having enough food for certain. But they didn't perceive a reality of themselves as having enough power to do something special in their own lives. Jesus, in another setting, said to his disciples, "You've seen me do many great things, but I tell you, you will do more wondrous things than I have." In order for this to happen, we have to realize the potential within ourselves. Once the disciples started to look around, working with what they had, they realized that they had more than what they needed. That's the reason for the collection of the 12 baskets back. It was more than what they needed. When we take what we have and we reach out to others in God's love, we will be amazed at the number of miracles that will happen. You see, each one of you, each one of us is a miracle. Now, I want you to take a moment. Just look around. Look at your neighbor. Look at your neighbor. Do you see each one as a miracle? You all are. I get to see a miracle all the time when I'm up here. Now, image what other miracles will happen as we reach out and we touch the lives of those who are hungry. Let this church believe it too is a miracle of living on the prophetic edge. Believe in who we are, a people of God, called to reach out, not asking God for help in this, but asking God, how are we supposed to use the blessings that you have given us to continue to create miracles within our community?